My dear brothers and sisters, aloha. I am honored and very humbled to be here with all of you on this beautiful campus. This place is very special to me, and I consider this ground that I stand upon to be sacred. I am a Kahuku girl, born and raised, and a proud Kahuku Red Raider. Before I introduce you to my husband, I hope you'll indulge me as I tell you a little about us. We met at a dance in Provo, Utah. He had just returned from his mission, and I was a freshman attending BYU in Provo. A mutual friend at the dance introduced us, and we hit it off rather quickly. We were engaged in 4 months and then married 3 months after that in the Mesa, Arizona temple. A tender mercy that we learned during our courtship is that our mothers knew each other. In the early 1970s, my mother worked at PCC as a tour guide supervisor. We learned that Vai's mother, Ruby, worked for her for a short period of time. On a few occasions, I came to work with my mom, and when she was required to attend a meeting or tend to other matters, she asked Ruby if she could watch me for her. I was about 4 years old. It was a sweet relationship they shared then, and we're convinced it is still that way in the spirit world today. We have 4 children, 3 in-law children, and 6 wonderful grandchildren, with another one arriving in June. They have all brought us the greatest joy we could ever imagine. My husband's career has taken us to St. Louis, Missouri, Gilbert, Arizona, Green Bay, Wisconsin, and southern New Jersey in the Philadelphia area where we currently live. In each place we've lived, I've done my best to share the aloha spirit that my parents and this place instilled in me. As a couple, we have covenanted with each other and to the Lord to serve him and to build his kingdom. We have found we are happiest in our marriage when we are engaged in this service. My husband has been a bishop, stake president, and since last April, an Area 70. Professionally, he played American football in the NFL. He is in the BYU Hall of Fame and the Polynesian Football Hall of Fame. He has worked at the NBC television station in Philadelphia for 25 years. 20 as a sportscaster, and the last 5 as a news anchor. Elder Vai Sikahema is committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is what I love most about him. I hope you will come to know him better and feel of his goodness in this short time that we have together. I am honored to introduce him to you.
Brothers and sisters, aloha. And malo lele. Among the things that was a condition of our marriage is that my wife said, you have to take me back to Hawaii as often as possible. And so I'm just living up to my agreement that I made as a young man. I would bring her as often as is possible. Lately, it's been every year. Since we've become empty nesters. So I love my wife so much. We are blessed also to have some of our children here with us, and my sister and my brother is in Hawaii, but wasn't able to make it this morning. The very first time I came to this campus was, I was 7 years old. It was nearly 50 years ago, April 1970. I don't have any baby pictures. That's a luxury most Tongans my age could not afford. The only photograph of me as a little boy is this portrait taken in a studio in Nuku'alofa for my Tongan passport. And my parents had immigrated from Tonga in 1969 to attend school on this campus, leaving me and my 2 younger siblings with our maternal grandparents until they could send for us. President Russell M. Nelson has said that the pursuit of an education is a religious obligation. That's a duty for all Latter-day Saints. But remember, President Nelson is not just a prophet of the church, he is the prophet for the entire world. It is a religious obligation for Catholics, for Jews, for Muslims, Hindus, and anyone who is a believer. Here's what the Lord said about our obligation to learn and be educated. Whatever principle of intelligence we attain unto in this life, it will rise with us in the resurrection. And if a person gains more knowledge and intelligence in this life through his diligence and obedience than another, he will have so much the advantage in the world to come. But the Lord also warns us that inherent in the learning process is a tendency to feel superior, elitist, or somehow that we're better than our fellow man. Jacob taught his family this important principle. But to be learned is good if they hearken unto the counsels of God. This morning I want to talk to you about our obligation to seek knowledge and an education. My parents came to Laie in 1969 to access my mother's academic scholarship out of Liahona High School, the church-owned school in Tongatapu. They only had enough for their one-way fare to Hawaii, so we were left in the care of our grandparents. They naively assumed that it would only take them a few months to earn enough to send for all three of us. Little did they know that the money they'd make dancing at the PCC was intended just to cover their most basic needs: food, electricity, and water, something that all of you probably know. It took them an entire year to save for my one-way fare, so I came alone in 1970. My siblings didn't come until 1972, so they hadn't seen my parents for over 3 years. Initially, we lived in a little home my parents rented in Hauula. One vivid memory I have of that house is that my mother had these small, empty Gerber baby food jars all over the house, and they were filled with coins. They literally saved spare change to help in our immigration. But I suspect the reason my mother had those jars out so visibly throughout the house was to entice visitors to also share any of their spare change. Yeah, my mother was incredibly smart. But my dear mother, who passed away about 7 years ago, would soon be faced with a dilemma that haunted her the rest of her life. Choose between her children and her education. My mother's dream was to graduate with a teaching certificate, return to Tonga, and teach at their alma mater, Liahona High School. My father had other ideas. He wanted to stay in the States and pursue the American dream. He prevailed on my mother to drop out of school, apply for resident alien cards, otherwise known as green cards, immigrate to the mainland, and work to bring my younger siblings from Tonga. So here was my mother's dilemma: remain in school but not see her two younger children for another few years. Return to Tonga to be with her children, likely ending any hopes of ever graduating. Finally, drop out of school, apply for permanent visas, find jobs, and work to bring their children from Tonga. With great trepidation, they chose the third option, and with some reluctance, Mom dropped out. They sold what they could. They packed up and they moved out of TVA. We're in Building D, by the way. If you're in 14th apartment, some of those holes, hopefully they fixed them since we were there. We moved to Mesa, Arizona, where my dad had a younger brother that was living in nearby Tempe. Without college degrees, my parents knew that for the rest of their lives, they would be relegated to working menial jobs, often a couple of them, in order to make ends meet. They immediately applied for permanent U.S. residency, which took a couple of years, but it happened. Our green cards arrived about the same time my siblings did, roughly about 3 years. Our piecemeal immigration took 3.5 years for us to be reunited as a family. My parents were literally strangers to my younger siblings when they arrived from Tonga, so young they didn't even remember my parents at all, which was heartbreaking. I am keenly aware that some of you are here under similar circumstances. I know that many are enrolled this semester whose families are living in poverty back home in Vava'u or Hawaii, Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, Cook Islands, Guam, Philippines, Cambodia, Thailand, or perhaps Vietnam. Maybe some of you came here alone, or perhaps you're newly married with young children. Maybe you had to leave your children back home with family while you came to pursue your education. I hope none of you ever have to face the dilemma of choosing between an education and your children. In retrospect, there were probably ways that my parents could have made it happen, but they just didn't know how. Today, the church provides BYU Pathway, iWork, the Perpetual Education Fund, and a host of other programs for anyone to pursue an education. Though she never regretted her decision, my angel mother was nevertheless haunted by the fact that she was just so close to a university degree, yet it was just out of reach. So, since a college degree was not in the cards, Mom would make it her life mission to provide her children with the tools to be educated with very limited resources. She didn't have any savings, but she paid her tithing faithfully, and she attended the temple weekly, and she pleaded with the Lord to help her find a way. And the Lord blessed her and us in the most miraculous ways. My parents knew nothing about the NCAA or college sports. But as I started to excel in football, it suddenly became clear to them that this was an avenue, a portal, to pursue a coveted college education. Some of the top coaches from elite universities came to our little humble home to recruit me. They all sat on my mother's woven mats because we didn't have furniture. And they all made their pitch on those mats. My parents were intrigued at the American system that determined that if you were really, really good at football, that the university would pay for everything, for tuition, books, room and board, and lots of food. What they call a full ride scholarship. I wouldn't have to fire dance, play the Tongan nafa, or sell pineapple delights, even if I wanted to. By NCAA law, I couldn't even work. When my father asked Arizona State's head football coach at the time, Frank Cush, in his broken English, "Coach, what my son need to come to ASU?" Frank Cush replied with a smile, "A toothbrush." Lost in the translation, my father didn't understand, but my mother whispered to him in Tongan, "Polosi fulunifo." He means Vai only needs a toothbrush. And then my father smiled and said loudly, "O Yahweh, totoat mon America." How beautiful is this America? We now faced a new challenge, qualifying me academically for those scholarship offers. My parents both worked long hours, Mom as a factory seamstress and Dad as a security guard. And my parents were oblivious to my academic challenges. They never attended parent-teacher night because I never bothered telling them. And why would I? I was making C's and D's. No reason for them to come talk to my teachers. My mother, though, had a visiting teacher named Barbara Nielsen. Sister Nielsen happened to be the English teacher at my high school, and she was also the faculty advisor of the school newspaper. As I was excelling on the field, I was failing miserably in the classroom, and Sister Nielsen knew that. So she came to our home and she told my mother, "Ruby, I want Vi in my English class. I want him to apply for a reporter position on the school newspaper staff. It will help him with his grammar, and I will teach him how to write. Unless he gets high marks on his SAT, I'm afraid he won't qualify for any of those prestigious schools recruiting him." So Barbara Nielsen came weekly, not monthly, she came weekly. Together, we read Dickens's Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, and A Tale of Two Cities. We read Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and Twain's Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. We did a deep dive into Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. We didn't just read these classics. Sister Nielsen wanted to have conversations about them. She expected me to follow and understand the plot, be familiar with the central characters, the protagonist and the antagonist. She wanted to know my opinion on why the authors cast Pip, Scout, and Uncle Tom as the protagonists in their stories. I don't know. I'm 16 years old. I didn't say it. I thought it. And I couldn't believe my dumb luck. My English teacher is my mother's visiting teacher. Here I was, a high school football star, but when Barbara Nielsen visited our home, my mother insisted that I sit right at her side like I was a 5-year-old. In a word, it was humiliating. And you think my mother cared? Not one bit. Today, Barbara Nielsen is in her 90s. I visited her a few years ago. She is the reason I qualified for BYU. She's the reason I graduated with a degree in broadcast journalism. Barbara Nielsen is the reason I'm anchoring television news in Philadelphia, the 4th largest television market in the country. She is why, within a generation, my parents' immigration from Tonga, we have reaped the rewards of an American education. Because my angel mother didn't know how to navigate the American college system, she prayed, and the Lord sent her Barbara Nielsen. I mean, what are the chances that my huge public high school's best English teacher and the faculty advisor of the school newspaper would be in my ward? I believe Vai Sikahema's prayers made it so. At this time in our lives, my father had drifted into inactivity from the church. So my mother relied on ward priesthood leaders to help raise us. Ned Brimley was our home teacher. One Sunday, I was passing the sacrament, and I went to the foyer with a tray of water. We had just passed the bread. A woman was just walking into the building late, so I approached her with a tray, and she took a cup of water. Mind you, we had already passed the bread. Brother Brimley happened to be in the foyer with his young daughter. As I made my way back into the chapel, Ned pulled me close, and he whispered, "Never pass the water to someone who has not taken the bread. The sacrament is sequential." I'll explain when I visit this week. I did not know what the word sequential meant, but I was intrigued. Later in the week, Brother Brimley visited. He came with a lesson about how the earth was created in 7 days and how God created it in sequence. God started by separating light from darkness, the waters from earth, plant life, animals, and so forth before Adam and Eve, and then he rested on the 7th day. The creation was sequential. He explained the priesthood is also ordained in sequence. Aaronic before Melchizedek. Each office within those priesthoods is sequential. Deacon, teacher, priest, elder, high priest, bishop, and so forth. It is sequential. Faith precedes the miracle. Sequential. Baptism is followed by the laying on of hands for the gift of the Holy Ghost. Sequential. The sacrament, sequential. The bread is always blessed and taken before the water. Brother Brimley ended by searing these words into my heart as a 12-year-old deacon. Vai, God's house is one of order. He expects you to live your life with order, sequentially. Serve a mission, go to college, get married, then have children. If you have children before marriage, your life will be out of sequence, out of order, and you will have problems. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Brother Brimley, I do. I understood the word sequential at age 12 in a powerfully personal and unforgettable way that many of my peers, even ones much smarter than me, could ever know it. And guess what? These lessons stayed with me. In time, when I was on a date with a cute girl, I remembered sequential, college, mission, marriage, children. College, mission, marriage, children. Sometimes she'd go, what are you mumbling? Never mind. I was an adult before I fully appreciated how many incredible teachers were in my ward. We had meager resources, and yet my mother's faith opened the windows of heaven. At age 14, I was assigned as a junior companion to Marty Klein, who was the librarian at my school. Marty was a Jewish convert from New York who joined the church with his wife, Mary Ellen, after visiting the church exhibit at the New York World's Fair in 1964. Later, Marty, the Kleins moved to Arizona so that Marty could get his master's degree at Arizona State. I especially loved home teaching with Brother Klein because he drove this big, huge Lincoln Eldorado, which had air conditioning. Neither my home nor our family vehicles had air conditioning. So Marty would let me turn all the vents towards me as he drove, and I'd crank the air full blast. If you've ever been to Arizona in August, you'd appreciate just what I'm telling you right now. One night we visited a single mother in our ward who lived in an apartment complex. I'll call her Sister Smith. When we knocked, she opened the door, and it was clear she had been crying. She invited us in and asked to speak to Marty alone in the kitchen, so I played with her young children in the family room and watched TV. After about an hour, they came into the living room, and Sister Smith turned off the TV, and Marty asked me to give a closing prayer. As we quietly walked to the car, Marty informed me that Sister Smith had requested that her name be removed from the records of the church. He asked me if I understood what that meant. I didn't. So Marty explained. And then Marty asked me if I was familiar with the word confidential. I said no. And Marty explained that confidential means a secret, and what he had just told me would be kept between us, Sister Smith, the bishop, and the Lord. For the foreseeable future, Sister Smith's only contact with the church would be our monthly visits. So he asked me if I would be responsible to make our monthly appointment with Sister Smith, who was willing to take my calls. It seemed a monumental task in light of her new circumstances. Words can't describe how Marty Klein empowered me that night in my mid-teens to keep something confidential and with the sacred assignment of making a monthly appointment with this dear sister whose only contact with the church would be our visits. For the next 2 years, I called her every month. She accepted our appointments, and we saw her on a regular basis. I don't know what happened to Sister Smith, but here's the postscript on Marty Klein. 40 years had lapsed, and I often wondered if Marty was still alive, and if so, where was he living? It took some time, but I found Marty and Mary Ellen retired and living comfortably in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Sadly, I also learned that the Kleins had left the church some 20 years before. I immediately got on a plane and I flew to Florida to see the Kleins for a weekend. We attended a spring training baseball game. While we were there, just had a great time. I told the Kleins that I'd take them to eat at their favorite restaurant, so they took me to the Golden Corral. Marty said, we need to be there at 4 o'clock for the early bird special. All right, Marty, we're 4 o'clock, we're there. I had arranged to fly home on a Sunday afternoon, so I asked the Kleins if they would forget whatever happened or whomever offended them for just a day and accompany me to the sacrament meeting at the Fort Pierce ward, their boundaries, which is in their boundaries. They agreed. In tears, I told Marty how grateful I was that he saved me as a kid when my dad was not active in the church. But I was heartbroken that he and Mary Ellen were estranged from the restored gospel. I introduced them to their bishop. And guess what? The Kleins started to go back to church. And when Marty died a couple years ago, he and Mary Ellen had ward callings, and they had temple recommends. We saved each other when one was weak and vulnerable at different times in our lives. It reminds me of this charge from the Doctrine and Covenants. And if any man among you be strong in the Spirit, let him take him that is weak, that he may be edified in all meekness, that he may become also strong. My parents could not afford private schools or even private tutoring, yet Barbara Nielsen, Ned Brimley, Marty Klein, and a host of others answered my mother's prayers that her children would be educated. It pained both my parents that they struggled financially, and we often needed a food order from the bishop's storehouse. When we did, Mom insisted that we clear our calendars on Saturdays so that we could all go to the bishop's storehouse. But that created a problem with my high school football coaches because we played our games on Friday nights, and they expected us back in the facilities on Saturday morning for a light workout and to watch the previous night's game films. It was mandatory. I was the best player on the team. I was a team captain and a leader, so the coaches depended on me to be there. Yet I was embarrassed having to explain to the coaches that my family accepted church assistance and that my mother insisted that I spend my Saturdays sweeping floors and stocking shelves at the bishop's storehouse. Then one day my mother showed up at school and asked to see Coach Peterson, my head coach. I was mortified. Slowly and with firm determination, Mom said, "Coach, you have Vi Monday through Friday. God gets him Sunday. He belongs to me on Saturday." Is that clear to you? From that day forward, the coaches showed me the game films on Monday during my lunch hour. My mother's prayers were being answered in miraculous ways. My siblings, Lynette, who's here, and my brother Cap, they traveled from Seattle and Salt Lake. I'm so proud of them. Lynette is an English teacher and an administrator in Seattle who will receive her PhD in August in education. Cap is an accountant and a high school football coach in Salt Lake. Like me, Cap played football at BYU, where he graduated in finance and earned a master's in public administration. My mother was just as proud that we graduated from seminary, that we all served missions, that we married in the temple and are firm in the faith. Another extraordinary thing in our family is that all of our children, all of my mother's grandchildren, have either graduated from college or they're in the process. And all of our in-law kids are all college graduates. One of my sons, LJ, is here with his wife, Kaylee, and our 3 grandsons. Kaylee graduated from BYU in English and is expecting number 4 in June. LJ just graduated from BYU Law School last spring and is studying for the bar exam next month. Last night, we met with President and Sister Tanner, and we want to announce in the process that we are in the process of establishing 2 scholarships here at BYU Hawaii in my mother's name and also in my wife Keala's mother's name, the Vai Sikahema and the Dorothy Heater Scholarship. Last year, we created the Vai Sikahema Foundation in Philadelphia, and last night our foundation made the first installment payment towards those scholarships. Once funded, they will in perpetuity pay tuition for worthy students from Tonga and here in Hawaii on this very campus where nearly 50 years ago my mother had to drop out. I pray that it pleases them. I close with this counsel from President Nelson. Because of our sacred regard for each human intellect, we consider the obtaining of an education to be a religious responsibility. Yet opportunities and abilities differ. I believe that in the pursuit of education, individual desire is more influential than institution, and personal faith more forceful than faculty. Our Creator expects His children everywhere to educate themselves. He issued a commandment: seek ye diligently and teach one another words of wisdom. Yea, seek ye out of the best books words of wisdom. Seek learning even by study and also by faith. And He assures us that knowledge acquired here will be ours forever. My dear young friends, I pray for your success, that with your degree in hand, you will go build the kingdom, whether here or abroad, remembering always the BYU motto: enter to learn, go forth to serve. In the sacred name of Jesus Christ, amen.